Like, good morning, good morning. My name is Jacob. You can call me Jack, and this is Throwing Hands. So, today we're going to talk about generational wealth. Trust me, you're going to want to listen to what's coming up. Sit back, relax, take some notes, and let me know what you think. Let's go. By now, I'm sure you've heard the words generational wealth thrown out a lot over the past few years. Unfortunately, these conversations tend not to have a lot of context, and there's a lot about this topic that needs to be addressed. So here's what we're going to do. We'll start with looking at a breakdown of wealth in the US, then move to a short history on generational wealth, its future complications, and some actual next steps. Data on wealth distribution in the US isn't perfect, but we do have some great clues. Check out these graphs. According to the Survey of Consumer Finances in 2017, the top 1% of Americans have not only about 45% of the wealth, but also earn about 25% of the income annually. Doing the math, that comes to about $2.25 trillion earned in income alone by the richest Americans. Now, despite what I just said, wealth is a little bit more difficult to really put a dollar value on. And it should be noted that these surveys shouldn't be taken as gospel. But in a country as wealthy as the United States, it doesn't really make sense why the disparity is the way it is. Everything I just said is probably intuitive to you. What may also be intuitive is that we didn't get here by chance. So, generational wealth, or lineal asset accumulation, just made that up, isn't a new concept. Inheritance over time and space has helped sustain some of the most famous families in American history. When we think about this in the context of the United States, the most relevant time period we should start at is right after World War II. The country just got through the Great Depression, and young adults at this time really didn't get anything from their parents. What they saved and worked for over the course of their lives, they gave to the baby boomers, people born in the 40s to the mid-60s. Now, when the baby boomers were growing up, they had a lot going for them. They inherited a substantial amount of wealth from their parents, and they were able to buy real estate that appreciated massively over time. And also, the sheer number of them allowed the U.S. workforce to explode, creating new workers, new businesses, and by extension, new consumers. Black people obviously didn't get most of these benefits. It wasn't just the fact that black boomers were pushed out of nicer areas. They were often the target of loan sharks that would charge them ridiculously high rates for both real estate and enterprise. These and many other structural factors contributed to the stalling of wealth building. All right, history lesson over. Let's fast forward. If you thought that income inequality was bad now, the next few decades are shaping up to be worse. Economists are anticipating something called the Great Wealth Transfer, where the inheritance of the baby boomer generation will get passed on to the Gen Xers and the millennials. This number is set to be anywhere from $24 to $68 trillion over the next 30 years. This transfer, in the form of real estate, cash, art, businesses, etc., is projected to help create over 600,000 nearly overnight millennial millionaires by 2030. Now, of course, this is all in theory, because things get a little more complicated when we consider what's coming up. If nothing changes, it's going to be more expensive to leave an inheritance as time goes on. Outside of the fact that the world is, a mess, there are a couple different factors that can make this number have a little turbulence. First is the rising cost of healthcare. For reasons that are outside the scope of this video, both healthcare and senior care are projected to increase, and not just because of inflation. Also, people are expected to live longer as medicine gets better, both delaying the transfer of wealth and allowing the older generation to spend that inheritance. Now, don't get me wrong, there's still projected to be a ton of money transferred in inheritance over the next few decades, but we'll get back to why that healthcare piece is really important later. Cool, so we went through some of the history of inheritance in the United States, and we have some solid ideas about where it's headed. And especially for African Americans, you already know it's important for us not to get left behind even further than we have been. But before we see generational wealth as the cure to all the problems, there are some things we should know about the process. The estate tax exemption. Of course, the IRS would be offended if we left them out the money talk. This estate tax exemption means that any inheritance sum valued over a certain amount, currently around $11 million, is going to get taxed progressively, up to 40%. Now, this is a really high limit and probably doesn't apply to most people, and of course, there are ways to get around this. But estates can encompass land, business shares, art, cash, etc. And if you're planning on having generational wealth, then these are the types of considerations you may start to have. And this is honestly the least of your worries. Family conflict. We've all seen that storyline in the movies where after the billionaire family member dies, there's some crazy, usually violent antics that the surviving family members go through to attempt to try and get a bigger piece of that pie. Hollywood isn't that far off. Family disputes over inheritance are no joke. And as inheritance becomes more common, so will its problems. Data on the United States is limited, but in a survey conducted by TD Bank in 2019 of financial planners, planning with family members was cited as the worst obstacle to effective estate planning across the board. In the UK in 2017, inheritance claims rose 47% in 1 year to nearly 200 cases. But maybe the biggest problem to inheritance is that sometimes it can just get wasted. All right, maybe not literally thrown down the drain, but there is data to suggest that a non-trivial portion of inheritors have nothing to show for it after 1 year. In a 2012 journal article, Zagorski found that as many as 1/3 of the people in his analysis did not retain any of their inheritance, no matter how big or small, after 1 year. As a matter of fact, over half of all the money inherited in that dataset was lost to either spending or failed investments. The rest was saved. Now, granted, no one knows how all inherited money is used and misused, but what's clear is that generational wealth can stop, and can often stop, after just one generation. After going over all of that, you might be asking, what can you do? If you want some practical goals to reach for, here's some non-professional advice. First, consider investing in your health and preventative medicine. You may want to consult a doctor and or a health consultant to construct a long-term health plan that's tailored to your genetics. If your family is prone to kidney disease like mine, then getting a plan to control your diet can save you literally hundreds of thousands of dollars down the road in medical expenses. Know your beneficiaries. I'm not in the business of telling anyone how to raise their kids, but it's important that beneficiaries are not incentivized to live off their inheritance. As billionaire Warren Buffett once said about his own kids, he plans to leave them enough money so that they feel like they could do anything, but not so much that they could do nothing. For Black families, this is especially true given that there's a lot of information about the US financial system that isn't quite embedded in our communities just yet. If you need a number to work towards, try to save $60,000 per child in a trust. It may sound like a lot, or maybe it doesn't sound like a lot, but between real estate, retirement accounts, what have you, you may find the sum easier to reach than you realize. Given inflation, this goal translates to about $30,000 in today's dollars by 2050. If you find that this goal is easy, try to double it. And lastly, create an estate plan by the end of 2022. This doesn't necessarily require a lawyer for the first one unless you already have a large amount of assets that you're trying to pass on. But you can start small with the resources that I'll link down below. Look, at the end of the day, every Black family should be thinking about what to leave behind for the next generation. Because costs will probably be rising again in the future, and we're still as a people so far behind, we have to go the extra mile to ensure that no one gets left behind anymore. But we need solid plans to do so. We have to make this journey intentional. Thanks for spending time with me today. So please, I know all the YouTubers talk about like leave a like and leave a comment, but I really do want to hear from you. What do you think about what we said? Leave a comment down below just talking about your thoughts on the video and what you think you should do for your next steps. Family, as always, appreciate you. Until next time.